I want to ask you a question. What's motivating you today? Are you chasing after something that really excites you? Or are you staying busy, running away from something that you don't want? Have a think back to when you first started your creative business or a creative project. What was driving you? Was it fear or excitement or both? I think it's important to think about these types of things because both of those motivations can be really helpful when you're starting. Often, we need fear as a driver to get us off the starting block. And I've been thinking a lot about recently why a lot of people get stuck at that first hurdle, why they can't commit and get themselves moving, and what stands people out who can get themselves started in the beginning, get themselves up to take action in the beginning. And I think a lot of times it's driven through fear, or what I like to call toxic motivations, or toxic fuel, if you like, to get them off the starting block. And I know that I definitely came from a place of that when I was first starting, having a drive to, make more money, or having a drive to run away from a career that you didn't like, or to prove people wrong, or to make people feel like you're someone to look up to. All fuel that we can use in the beginning to get us off the starting block. But if that's all you've got and you're only using that forever, you're not going to be in it for a long time. And I think I've hit that sort of hurdle recently where I've been thinking about what is it that is driving me and why have I all of a sudden come up against a hurdle? I think we reflect and we think that we're truly driven by this intrinsic motivation just to be, a good person and help people. And then we hit a roadblock and we think, actually, is it that? Are we driven by that? Or have we confused ourselves? Have we convinced ourselves that we are going after something intrinsic when actually we're just chasing after this external motivation to prove people wrong or to make something good of ourselves and to look better in the eyes of others? So I want to talk about both of those things today and how I think that both of those fuels, whether it be positive or negative, need to be held in a balance. And sometimes, we can start off with a really toxic fuel when we're first starting, but that can really help to propel us, to get us out of a scenario that we don't want, to get us away and take risks that we wouldn't otherwise take. But if you keep on doing that, you're going to crash and burn when that why isn't clearly there. And so how do we pivot into something which is much more sustainable, which we can continue to keep driving for, a motivation that will fuel us for years to come once we've escaped whatever it was we were running away from. I said that I had this bit of an existential crisis recently when all of a sudden I realized that, maybe I wasn't going about things in the most positive way. Maybe I wasn't fueled by the best motivation. And it all came to a head when I've always set out to try to help other people, to try to uplift others and to try to, educate and share in the world and put good energy out there in the world. And I was starting to get, impacted by some of the things people were having to say to me online. Some very negative comments were starting to get to me. And of course, they'll get to anyone, right? But I think to some people, they do become a bit like water off a duck's back. When you're clearly driven by something internally, you can forget those external influences. And I was having a tough time, pushing that aside. I was having a really hard time, grounding myself and understanding my why and getting back to the reason that I started. And I think those negative comments had a bit of an impact because of the fact that I'd been starting to take a few of the positive comments too seriously. Okay. And so let me paint the picture for you. I was back when I was first starting, educating in photography online, as I do a lot these days. When I first started that, I really wanted to help other people, share what I knew, put out information into the world that was easily accessible for people who may not be able to access education, who may not have someone around them that they can ask for help when they were first starting. People like me who felt quite isolated when they were first starting. I know what it's like to be there, and I was in that position for a long time. And so I wanted to put things out in the world to be able to help other people just like me who were going through that situation and to, help them up when they're first starting. And I really enjoyed that. And that was something that really drove me when I was first getting into that. But then all of a sudden, as I started to help people, the sort of positive referrals came back. I started getting messages from people saying thank you for how much I'd helped them, or thank you for putting this work out into the world, or thank you for sharing what I know, because it's a rarity in the world today. I feel like a lot of people hold back. And so I was getting a lot of these positive reinforcements around the work that I was doing. And I think what happened was I started to overinflate the value of those positive comments, to the point that if I didn't receive positive comments for a couple of weeks at a time, all of a sudden my work wasn't good enough, or I wasn't doing enough, quote unquote, in the eyes of others. And I'd started to drift away from my why I started, of helping other people, and into a realm of just trying to make myself look good in the eyes of others. And I think that is why the really bad comments hurt so much, because it was almost a flip of like, I'm not getting the positive comments, and now they're going the other way, and I'm starting to get more negative comments. But I'd started taking the comments to heart because I'd inflated the really good positive comments. And so I'd had to start to reflect on, well, maybe there was a bit of underlying ego when I was first starting, of wanting to put myself out in the world, wanting to set myself up and be recognized by other people, wanting to feel like I'd created some sort of, everlasting stature, not wanting to be forgotten, wanting to prove myself that I was actually worthy as a photographer. I'd always struggled with imposter syndrome before that, and I've spoken about that many times before. And all of a sudden, I now had people looking up to me and my work. But I'd overextended that to the point that was all I was continuing trying to uphold, rather than going back to the ground and where I started and saying, well, I'm just trying to help people. And I can't help everyone, but at least I'm trying to help some people who are just starting. And that quickly shifted to the point where I realized, hang on, maybe I'm not on as stable ground as I probably should be. And some of those other things did start to come up, and I had to re-reflect and say, well, how do I remove the ego from this? This helped me when I was first starting. Of course, that want to be liked, that want to be seen as a positive role model in the eyes of others, that want, to get those affirmations, to be looked up to, is really helpful when you're first starting. You start to see those, and those sort of like vanity metrics on social media grow. And that's all they are, just vanity metrics, that a lot of people have got eyes on your work, and you start to feel more inflated that you can do more work, and the ego starts to grow, and you continue to build that. And it's hard to look against that once you start, over-indexing the value of those sort of positive comments, those big numbers on social media, then just reflecting back to, hang on, why were you actually starting? And so I think I had to sit back and reflect on that a bit recently. And it's been something that's been on my mind a lot, about how do we get through that hurdle? Because I was always under the impression that maybe I was coming at it from a really good place. And it wasn't until I started to get troubled by a few things that I was like, well, hang on, maybe the groundwork, maybe the base isn't as stable as it possibly should be. Another example, I even think back to when I was starting my photography business, right back in the beginning, when I wanted just to go out and photograph people and actually document people's lives. I thought it was a really noble pursuit to go and capture these memories for other people, and be able to give them those memories and give them those images and capture their life as it happened in that moment, because it'll be something that I know that they'll value in years to come. And I've kind of been reflecting on even that. Was there something else underlying that? And there probably was, right? You don't just start something out of a want to help other people. I don't think that as a motivation is strong enough. And so I want to set up in this conversation here that it's okay if you're driven by something else when you're first starting. I don't want that to be the sentiment that that's bad, because I think we all are. But I think recognizing it is a big step in a positive direction to move it into something else. And you've got to pivot what it is that motivates you, what it is that gets you off the starting block. You've got to pivot it into something else that's more sustainable long term, because we can't continue to burn the candle at both ends from the start, because you'll eventually burn out. And so whatever it was that was driving you from the start, for me, I think it was a definite want to prove other people wrong. I've spoken about before my story of starting in a very scientific background. I was studying maths and science before I transitioned into photography, a very arts career, I guess. Had no background in any sort of business, any sort of understanding of how to run a business, even how to do photography. And so there was that want to, prove to people that I actually could do this, to prove to other people that I could make this transition and that I could achieve something that I actually wanted to do on my own standing, to run away from the beliefs of other people and what they held on me of what I needed to be. And so that was a big driver to get me motivated every single day. There's no way you would spend 12 hours a day working on something if you didn't have a strong drive to want to get away from something. And I think that was huge for me when I was first starting. I always had a lot of financial insecurities as well, like wanting to, not be stuck, not be going paycheck to paycheck, especially in that first couple of years when I was starting my business. It was hard. And anyone that's ever started a business will tell you that you probably don't make a lot in the first 2 years, but there is something driving you that wants to get out of that spiral. And as bad as that spiral is, it sometimes can help propel you. And it's either you quit and you go and do something else, or you continue through it and you've learned a lot through that process. And for me, that was a real driver just to continue on, to say, hang on, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be stuck in this rut. But the further you get down the track, you realize that once you get away from that a bit further, and once you are more financially stable, that can't be your driver anymore. You can't continue to use that. And so you either hit a brick wall and realize, hang on, what do I keep doing now? I've achieved the things that I wanted to achieve. What do I do? Or you reframe your motivation and you find something else that is a bit more positive that can sustain you more longer term, whether that be for financial security for your family, for other people around you, for being able to bring other people on and hire your friends and give them jobs as well. And whether it be just a drive to want to continue to improve, a more intrinsic motivation to want to keep improving your craft and your skill set rather than trying to prove other people wrong that you couldn't actually do this when you started. So that's what I want to talk about today. And I think there's a lot of examples in my own life that I want to give, but I want to open it up for you to reflect on your own life as well, because I think it's so important transitioning. And you may be in that stage at the moment where you're coming up against that brick wall of like, well, everything that I used to get me off the starting block has diminished. I've run out of that fuel, and that's normal. We all do. But you've got to be able to find another form of fuel. And the ones who do make it more long-term have found a more sustainable way to continue them, to keep driving them on in years to come. If you're still not sure if you are driven by a more toxic fuel or a more negative form of fuel, I want to go over a few examples here for you. Now, that's not to say that these are bad, okay? I said that in the start, that these aren't necessarily bad things. These can really help you get off the starting block. But if you're still motivated by some of these things, it could potentially mean that there is a transition that needs to happen. You may need to start thinking about, well, how can I change some of these things? And we'll get to that a bit further on in this conversation. But I want to start by just sort of setting up what some of these things could be so you can identify them in your own life and identify some of the things and the reasoning. We're obviously not going to dive too deep into that, but you can sort of take a bit away from this and think about in your own life some of these things and how they come to fruition and if they are driving you and how you can possibly change them. So I want to go over a bit of a list of a few things here and we can talk about some of the things that could be behind them as well, because I think that's really important to understand for yourself. I think one of the first ones is proving other people wrong. It's a big driver for a lot of people when they're first starting, is that a lot of family, friends don't believe that they can actually do this. So to prove other people wrong can be a really big motivation when you're first starting. We want to escape that doubt or judgment by other people. We want to say to them, well, screw you, I can do this. And I'm going to work extra hard to prove to you that I can. But I hope that you can see that in the long term, it's not super sustainable, because once you do make it, once you prove them wrong, then how do you keep going with that? There are some people who may forever think you still haven't achieved it, and you may have one person, maybe your parents still don't believe that you've ever achieved anything, and maybe you're holding on to that belief in your own head so that you can keep accountable and keep yourself motivated, but it's not going to be forever. And so I think it is very powerful when you're first starting. It allows you to, having any of these forms of more toxic fuel, allow you to get off the starting block, allow you to make decisions that other people probably wouldn't, act out of a place of fear, that allow you to make decisions that probably aren't the best. If you think back on them, you think, well, why did I do that? Why did I burn myself at both ends here? Why did I almost like run myself financially dry in order to make this work? Because you would never give that advice to someone else. But when you're working out of a position of fear, it can be so easy to put all those things aside because you've got this other big driving force that just blinds you to everything else around. I think a big other one of those fears is a fear of failure. Like, we don't want to start something and then 6 months later turn around and say we've ended it. So that fear of failure can just continue once you're started. How do you ever stop? There's that fear of failure in the eyes to others. And this kind of links into the other one of proving other people wrong, is that you don't want it to have to turn around and say to them, oh, it just all didn't work out. And so that continues you driving. And that could probably hold you on for the first 5 or so years, I'm sure. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are still in business today who think I can't quit and I can't go back and go get an extra job or go get another side job even though times are tough, because I don't want it to seem like I've quit. I don't want to seem like I've failed in the eyes of others, when really it probably is the best thing to do. I've talked about that a lot with a lot of friends, that maybe you should go and get an extra job on the side to financially sustain you, because making decisions out of a place of financial stress is never good. You never make the best decisions for your business long term. You only make decisions in the very short term to try to help with that sort of flow of cash. But long term, they're probably not the best decisions. So maybe getting another job is the best decision for you, but you can't see that because you're blinded by that fear of failure. So it can really help in the beginning, but sometimes longer term, it's not going to be the best. There's another thing of, feeling like you need the validation and approval from other people. It might not be the family and friends who don't think you can achieve these things. Maybe it is someone else who you're aspiring to be like, right? Maybe you've got someone in your friend group, someone who was your boss in a previous job who you really look up to, and you're trying to seek approval from them to say, look, I can do this too. And that's a real motivator to get off the starting block. You can be comparing yourself to all types of people. Compare yourself to a friend you went to school with who also started their business around the same time. And you're thinking, well, I've got to stay in it just as long as them because I'm comparing myself to them. And that can be helpful, right? We can all find friends who are all trying to come up together. And it's really helpful in that beginning stage to be driving against one another and trying to outdo one another. And then against the point when one of your friends drops out and they've had enough because they've realized that that's not sustainable, and then you're stuck there alone. And that was the only thing driving you, or an opportunity for them presents itself in a completely different area. And so now you have nothing else to compete with them on. How do you continue? We can see how these things aren't easy to overcome. They can really help when you're starting. But I think when we think back about them, a lot of them probably drove you when you were first starting. And they certainly drove me. And I think back and I think about all of these things and I'm like, wow, that probably is true. And I want to make the case for a transition away from these things. I think escaping scarcity is a big one, whether that be whether that be financial scarcity, whether that be housing insecurity, whether that be not having friends or family around you that have ever created something for themselves and never started a business. And there's always been that scarcity around you that you can't achieve things, that you're not ever going to have anything good. And so you're sort of trying to get out of that hole, trying to escape something that was hard. I think that's a massive motivation for a lot of people in saying that, I look up to my parents and they just worked this like a minimum wage job for 30 to 40 years and they just barely got by. And I don't want to be like that. And so we're escaping that. We're trying to run away from that. But once we do make it to a point where we are pretty financially secure, or once we do have a house, or once we do have employees in our business and we're pretty secure, how do you continue that on? There's definitely people out there I know that are in a really good financial position that are still just continuing to work hard every single day, so they don't have to stop to actually think about those types of things. I think that's when it gets scary. That's what we're trying to do here, is have that conversation to think about these things. A lot of people just continue working so they don't have to think about these things. Because I think if they did stop and think, they would have so much more time to realize that that's what they're driving away from. And it's hard to make a transition into something that, is more sustainable. This isn't an easy thing to do, for sure, especially when you've used something as a crutch for so long. I talked about it before, but ego is a huge one. Trying to be that person for someone else. And once you start getting affirmations, I was in this position, start getting those positive, reaffirming things from other people to say you're on the right track. How hard is it to stop? How hard is it to to look back and say, well, hang on, I'm not going in the right direction, but these people keep telling me that I am. So my ego is this way. I can see if I keep going in this direction, it's going to get me more like status. It's going to get me more opportunities within this crowd that I really need to prove myself to. So how do you take yourself down off that and say, well, that's not really what I want. I want to be over here. But your ego won't allow you to bridge that gap and go in a different direction because you know it's best for you. Because over here, you're being held up by all these other people. It can be so hard. I know a lot of people that are stuck in their one sort of business right now that are held up by other people saying, oh, you're amazing at this. You should continue to do this. I just love when you do this. And they're inside saying, I actually don't really like it that much. I'm just stuck here because these people keep saying that I'm amazing at it. But how do I change and how do I transition into something else that they may not approve as much of or that might not be as highly regarded on Instagram today? There's a lot of trends that are really high at the moment that people are like, well, I can't switch out of that because that's what allowed me to get to where I am. It's an ego thing to think that you wouldn't be able to do something else and enjoy it as much because right now it just feels so good, that high that you're on. There's another big one a lot of people use, which is called the kind of the revengeism, to get away from, to take revenge on something that they've done before, another person who did slight them before in a past job, a past career, that's someone who told them that they couldn't do it before, even a friend who has done something and you're trying to outdo them because they told you that they couldn't achieve it or that they told you couldn't do something before. And so now you're trying to get back at them by out-achieving them in this other avenue. So many different things. And the other one that I want to touch on just finally is that feeling of not being good enough in yourself, that feeling of imposter syndrome that I've spoken about before, that I definitely had to come to realization that I had a lot of imposter syndrome. And so I was just working harder and harder to get better and better, but not for any internal thing, not that I wanted to prove it, not that I wanted just to get better at my own craft, because I wanted to improve to that sort of bad part of myself, which was really an extension of other people, thinking that I wasn't good enough. Because it's not me internally, it's a projection of what I'm thinking that other people think about me. Right? It's not me trying to improve myself just because I really love what I do and I want to get better every year and I look back on where I was last year and I'm really, really wanting to do better by the end of this year. No. It's running away from what I think other people think of me, that they don't think I'm that good. Even though that might not be true. It's just a story I've told myself in my own head. It's easy to continue with that story because it continues to drive you. But you get to a point where you think, hang on, I am actually okay at this. I have actually achieved a bit. Now what's motivating me, right? Now what's my drive to continue on once you do get to that point? It's the reason that a lot of us don't celebrate the successes that we've had, because it's easy just to ignore them and just to continue driving on and to continue to tell ourselves that story that we're not good enough. And we're still not there. Because if we ever tell ourselves that we are there, then what's driving us? Again, I want to say that these things are okay. These things, having these fuels when you're first starting, are great. One of the hardest things to do in any new creative endeavor, whether it be starting a business, starting a new creative hobby, starting. Emphasis there on starting is the hardest thing, right? Far too many people have ideas, but they never start on them. And probably the reason why is because they don't have a good enough fuel, good enough motivation to get off the starting block, right? So if you don't have enough fuel, you need that initial burst to get over the inertia of standing still, right? We need to get off the starting block. But once you're propelled, an object in motion will remain in motion. It's easy to stay on that course once you've started, but starting off the starting block is so hard to get from still to moving. So sometimes we've got to use that fuel, and it can allow you to put the blinders on to everything else in the world, because you've just got this one goal that you want to go after, and you've got this fuel driving you from behind. But then you look down the road and the goal that you set for yourself is now behind you as well. And so what's driving you ahead? We'll often get to this point, right? We've gone past the goal that we initially had for ourselves, but we're still being propelled from behind. We're not being dragged forward. And that's okay. We're still heading in the right direction, but we're slowing down. And so what can we do to continue our momentum that way? Or even realize that maybe that's not the way we want to go. We want to just turn slightly, go in a different direction. But it's easier to turn once we've already started. It's harder to turn when you're still. It opens you up to take more opportunity, to take a bigger risk, to go fully into something, to be unreasonable when other people wouldn't be, because you're just so far wanting to get out of a situation that you're in before. You're so far wanting to prove other people wrong that you'll take an unreasonable amount of risk that nobody else would if they were in an okay position. If they were feeling really good within themselves, why would they? Why would they go out of their way to do that? That can be really helpful when you're starting. I know that I burnt myself at probably 3 ends when I was first starting. Didn't have the security that I probably needed to have. I did things, every job that I got, I was still trying to work out how to do the job the day before, because you just had to accept jobs because you needed the income, and that income would then allow you to get the other gear that you needed to execute on the job. And so it was a continual spiral, and you just do whatever you can when you're first starting. Is it smart? Probably not, right? I don't think anyone would look at a small business in the first 2 years and say that's a good financial investment by that person, right? You'd be much better off going to get a normal, stable 9-to-5 job, right? If you were just looking at it in those sort of short term. But we allow ourselves to put the blinders onto that to get right into it because we are driven by something else, and that's okay. But it's hard when you start to slow down. And so I want to allow us to investigate other ways that we can be driven. How about like we did before with some of the more toxic fuel? How about we go through some of the more positive fuel, some of the more ways that can really drive you in a positive direction? So some of these things that we may have to make a transition towards, and we'll kind of go through some examples of those transitions. But I want to put an actual label and give examples of some more positive fuel that can really drive you, because I think these things are sort of grounded in more sustainable goals. They're a lot more like meaningful, more directed in your why and purpose than other things were that you had to use to get you off the starting blocks. I think the first big one is freedom. I think that's okay to have more autonomy in your life, to be able to design your life and your business and your structure around the things you do every single day. To me, that's real freedom, to be able to have that choice. That's a really cool driver, to be able to have that, to say, well, look, I'm continuing to do this because it allows me to do the things that I like to do every day. It allows me to choose the jobs that I want to work. I don't have to be stuck in that space out of scarcity to accept every single job that comes my way. I can now turn around and just choose the jobs that I really enjoy. And it opens me up for more space to be more creative and to go and try new things that I don't need to earn an income from, because not everything needs to move the needle in my business, because I've given myself more freedom. Impact is the big one. Being able to help other people. Being able to feel like you're giving opportunity for other people to be seen, to empower other people to feel like they can do something too, right? That can be a really cool driver to stay where you are, to continue doing the things that you do because you're helping other people, because you're giving them an opportunity to be seen, right? You may have had opportunities when you were first starting. You may have had a head start on some other people, but to now be able to help those people up is, a real privilege and can really help you to continue driving years to come, because you'll forever be able to help people up. You aren't ever forever able to escape your past self because you've already achieved that, right? But there will always be people behind you that can help, no matter how long you stay in this. I think creativity is a big one, especially for us artists, is feeling like we can be creative. Experiment more with the jobs that you do, but also what you actually what you deliver to the client. Not feeling like you've got to be stuck down and can't be afraid to take a chance because they could have something bad to say about the end result. I think once you get more secure in who you are and who you are in your business, much more stable position, it's a driver to say, well, I want to continue that because it allows me the freedom to be more creative. Because if I do get someone come back to me and say that they weren't the biggest fan, it's not going to impact my whole career. When you're first starting, you get one bad review, you're gone. And it feels like you're gone. It feels like the biggest thing ever when you get a bad review. When you've been doing this for 10 years and you be a bit more creative with a project and you get someone come back to you and say, hey, this probably wasn't what I was after. It's not as much of an ego burden because you've created that sense within yourself that it's okay to take that bit of a chance to try something new, because half the time it probably will turn out okay. But those aren't chances and those aren't probably big risks that you would have taken when you first started. So that opportunity to be more creative is a big driver to continue on, because the more and more you get into this, the more you get known for something that you do, the more you can be creative and have other people just sort of trust in you in the process. There's another one around a big drive to be the best, to have that sort of like mastery in a craft. And it has to be intrinsic. because it's not about anyone else. It's you wanting to do better than yourself, where you were this time last year. It's how much can I learn because I really enjoy the craft of learning things, right? Of course, there can be little extrinsic things in there too that you want to do better than the other person next door. Yeah, cool. But trying to find that intrinsically is the best way to go about it. It's like, how can I be the best version of me that I can? How can I learn as much as I possibly can to be the best artist in my field that I possibly can? Even if it's a bit obscure, how can I be a bit better and have more skills than I did this time last year? That's always a good marker to go back on. Where were you this time last year? The only person you should ever compare yourself to you. The only person you should ever compare yourself to is you, because you don't know where anyone else is starting from. It's an uneven scale, right? But comparing yourself to you this time last year, it's a fairly even scale because you were at the same position, right? Are you ahead of where you were then? Or have you just continued to do the same thing and you haven't progressed yourself? That idea of wanting to be improved on where you were last year, that can be a real big driver, and you can continue that on forever. Is that I want to have 3 new skills by the end of this year and I want to have them down, right? Add some new offerings into my sort of services, try some new things, feel okay to charge more because I know that I'm improving my craft every single year. Being able to build connections with other people can be a really big driver. You know, if you can stay in something for a longer period of time, if something that you get well known for, being able to build connections with other people through that is a really big driver. I know for me, when I'm in this position right now, is that I've built a lot more connections in the past couple of years than I ever did when I was first starting. Because when I'm first starting, people are unsure if you're still going to be here, right? Driving on, continuing on, I've now built more connections with people in my industry, but also outside my industry, because I don't really care so much about if I try to connect with someone and they don't ever get back to me. It's okay. It's not, my ego's removed from it to know that they've got stuff going on as well, right? But that opportunity to build connections more long-term can be a really cool driver, whether it be with other people in your industry, other sort of peers, or people below you that you're trying to help up, building connections within the community, being able to build something larger than yourself in a way that we can connect. And I love being able to do that anytime that I can do something in person. It's always a real privilege because I know that I've gotten myself to a position where I'm able to do something like that. And that's, a really nice driver to continue on to say, hey, I want to continue to do these things because they really make me feel good. It's not about anyone else or how I'm perceived by the outside. And then I think even extending on that is, what can you build that is larger than you? If you're in a profession where you can create something that is much larger than you to help other people and create something outside you that you can hire other people on to help you do it. We can build that connection with other people and create a brand, create some type of event outside yourself that can build a more legacy in your brand and the work that you do. Or you can create some artwork that was able to tell someone else's story much more better than they could, and to continue that on for them. That can be a really big driver that's way outside of you. That isn't about you then, right? And if it is, maybe have a think about why. Right? When you can find something that you can really pour 100% into that's not about you, I think that's when you really know that that's a really secure driver that you're going to have for a lot of years to come. And I think growth and your purpose all come into that. Finding a bigger why. Finding something else that you can do. And it's something that I reflect on my photography all the time is yes, when I was first starting, I was just trying to succeed and just trying to do everything that I possibly could to, make an income, to prove to other people that I could actually do these things, prove people wrong, to prove to myself that I could achieve these things. As an introvert, as someone who didn't have the skills in this area 12 months before, could go out there and work with other people and get these memories of them, then turned into a bigger why of, well, now I actually want to capture these memories for other people. I want to go to weddings. I want to go to their wedding day. I want to go to people's wedding day and capture memories for them because I know how important it is. Myself being 3 years and married myself can already see it. Right? How strong is that going to be in 10 years' time when I see the importance of looking back and having those new memories? That's a much bigger why than myself. I don't care what other people might say. I'm great. Who cares? It's about wanting to help them because I know that they're going to care about this in 15 years' time. And finding that bigger why is so important. Let's now transition into how we can take some of this really negative fuel, really toxic fuel when you're first starting that may be really highly flammable and help you get off the starting blocks, but it really burns out quickly. and transition that into something more positive, something that can be more sustainable long term. And we'll go through a few of them here. I wanted to bring in 5 different examples of ones that I think can be really easily transitioned, and you can think about your own. If there were some examples before of toxic fuel that you think are still driving you, you can have a think about how you could maybe transition them. I think the really first one is the proving other people wrong. That need to feel sort of validated by other people, to prove them wrong, to feel like, they've had something bad to say about you in the past. I think that's a really good opportunity to maybe discover your own why, to discover something within yourself. What is actually your purpose? What are you driving for? If you could ignore them and do anything you wanted to tomorrow, what would you do? What would excite you to get up and continue to do it if you didn't have to continually prove these people wrong? What would have excited you a few years ago? Have a think about that. Have a think about who you were a few years ago. What would have excited that person? And are you already able to do some of those things today? Are you already able to get up out of bed and just work for yourself and not have to go into a job? Are you already able to take on creative projects that you really enjoy, that you find a purpose in? Are you able to do projects that may not bring in the most income because you're already more financially secure than you ever thought you were? And so you're able to do projects that can help other people. Is that something to be proud of? Is that something that could motivate you more than trying to prove to other people that you've already succeeded? Is to use that success that you've already gotten to help others, or to help yourself, or to help other people see that this is an opportunity that they could get as well. A lot of people, have achieved a lot of really good things. And so being aspirational, being an inspiration to other people who don't see that as a path for themselves is a much more better fuel than trying to prove people wrong that you've already proven wrong time and time again. That fear of failure that we talked about before, that's a big fuel from a lot of people. That fear of not wanting to do the right thing, or feeling like they've had to switch careers, or they've had to change something along the way, or they've had to stop, or they've had to admit to other people that they've just had to stop because they weren't able to find success. I think you can turn that into a big curiosity or a desire for experimentation, or to want to try new things. It's not about a fear of not succeeding. It's about allowing yourself to every now and again try something new, to expand that curiosity. Ask yourself, how many things have you tried that are new this year? And rather than seeing that as a failure, seeing that as a great thing, that you've tried new things. Because how often is it that when we try something new, that ends up being the direction that we go in, right? So much of the reason that we need that toxic fuel when we're starting is because it allows us to get off the starting block to then see the other opportunities that we wouldn't have seen when we were stuck back down on the ground level. As soon as we get up into the atmosphere, we can see all the other opportunities around us. And so if you only continue to do one thing because you're trying to not seem like you've failed at that one thing, you'll never open your eyes up to other opportunities. And so that can be a definite driver, and it has been for me, is to be like, well, look, I'm a really curious person. And so my desire is to be able to sustain myself and create a business where I can be curious, where I can experiment, where I can do other things that I really enjoy. Who knows if they're going to work out? That's not the end goal. The end goal is just to be able to try something new every now and again when I would like to. And far too many people don't want to try something new out of the fear that sends the wrong signal to other people that they haven't achieved in their other thing that they were already in. Because trying something new just means that, oh, well, this other thing mustn't have worked out. Well, no, reframe that in your own head to say, well, I've been able to try this other thing because this thing has worked out. But we're too scared to admit that to other people, that we don't look internally in ourselves and say we've done so much here that has allowed us the freedom to do other things. I like to touch on the financial pressure as well, because I think that is a big thing for a lot of people, right? When they're first starting, they may not have been the most financially secure. And so the driver especially in those first few years, is to maintain a business that is financially secure. But once you become financially free, how does that remain a driver, right? When you have done that, when you've achieved that, and when you can see it long term, I think a lot of us spiral down the path of, well, who knows where I could be in 10 years, right? So I've got to keep working harder right now. But you may not be in business in 10 years because you'll burn yourself out before you get there. So let's try to do this a bit more sustainably, right? Because almost the enemy that you fear will be the enemy that you create in your own head, right? Because you talk about it so much, because you talk about, well, I don't know if my career can be here in 10 years. AI is going to be here in a couple of years' time. I've got to work really hard right now to earn everything that I possibly can because I'll be out of business. Well, if that's what you're scared of, that'll often happen to you because you've put yourself out of business by driving yourself into extinction rather than opening your mind to other opportunities that you don't even realize are here, that in 2 years' time, AI could allow you to do something completely new that you don't even know exists yet. But you'd closed yourself off to working as hard as you possibly could in this one thing because you were trying to run away from that financial insecurity. Right? Open your mind up to the opportunity that, well, hang on, I may not be able to do the work that I do in my capacity right now. That's okay. But I've given myself this other skill set to set myself up to be more financially free, to bring on staff, to expand my sort of business, to open me up to a more umbrella that I can offer other services to other people, that I've opened my mind to thinking that there is more out there, that I am setting myself up, that I am becoming more financially free by investing in these things and investing in other things, broadening my horizon rather than just sticking to this one thing and trying to earn as much money as I can in 2026, because chances are that won't sustain you for the next 30 years, whereas these other investments may, right? It's even a better thing when you can find something outside yourself, whether it be family, friends, as I said before, wanting to create more of a thing that's a lot more than you. You know, when you're investing in a house for your family, when you're investing in friends and family, hiring them, bringing them on for jobs, when you're creating something more than yourself. Because I think far too often we create a small business when we're first starting. We're stuck in that small business headspace of, well, I've just got to maintain a business that can sustain me. And so we never look for other opportunities that could grow the business because, well, our goal was to just be financially free. And our idea of financial freedom is that we can actually pay our bills in the here and now. But we ignore that there could be more than that. We could definitely get more than that. We could definitely hire staff. We could definitely grow a business that could have other people work for us so we don't have to work. And we can reduce our hours, then we get more time back. And that, to me, is more valuable than the income that I could get from it. But we don't see that because income was the only driver in the beginning. So many different fuels that you could take to say, well, hang on, I may not need to earn more, but I've become more financially free because I've stepped away a lot more to just do the things that I really enjoy. Like I just enjoy being a photographer, so I just do the photography now. And I've got an admin person. I've got someone that handles all my like marketing. I don't need to do all these different things. I just do the photography. I outsource my editing. That to me is more financial freedom. And you've given yourself a path to even hire other people in those other roles, that it becomes more sustainable long term, that then opens you up in your own head to see other opportunities before they present themselves, rather than just trying to escape from something that isn't even a threat anymore. The other big one I spoke about before was that fear of like comparison and trying to compare yourself to other people, you know, feeling like you're not good enough in the eyes of others, even that fear of that you think you're not good enough in the eyes of others, you know, that sort of self-doubt, that imposter syndrome that we all face, of feeling like you're trying to get away from that. And that's the only reason that you're trying to do anything. And I had to come to terms with this myself. And I had to move it into a direction of, I want to be the best version of me that I possibly can. I want to be the best photographer that I possibly can be. And that's not for anyone else, it's just for me. Right? Because I enjoy it. And I've spoken about wanting to experiment, wanting to be more curious, but it's also wanting to just improve, right? Every year I want to look back on the year before and say, how many new skills have I learnt this year? How much further along as a photographer am I than I was last year? I don't care about the awards. I don't care about the successes that I've gotten from other people. But how much have I grown? How many new skills have I learnt? How do I walk in when I go to take photos? Am I a lot more in the right headspace when I walk in there because I'm a much more sure person on who I am and the skill set that I have and the sort of way that I conduct myself? How many new scenarios have I thrown myself into to experiment that I've walked out with new skills, or that I've walked out with some sort of understanding, even if it didn't all go to plan? And that's not to say that I'm not any more of a photographer than anyone else around me. Who cares? I've thrown myself in that scenario. I've learnt something on the job rather than just trying to hear it from X, Y, or Z on the internet. I've actually gone out and gone and done that thing that's taught me so much. And then the other thing, ego. How do we reframe the ego? How do we reframe that success that we first get when we're first starting? Maybe friends and family around you have said, oh, wow, you're doing so well. But that doesn't sustain forever. They don't continue to say, oh, you're doing so well every time you hang out with them. Or people on the internet. Then do we turn to them? And they're trying to say that, oh, look how amazing you are. You do so well, There's that ego involved of being around another group of artists in your community, online, wherever the case may be, that you're held in higher regard. And so that's the thing that's continuing to drive you to stay there. But that can also be an opportunity to help other people up, to be that inspiration, rather than the ego being the driver, to want to be seen as a better person than others. It's, well, now I want to be in that position because it allows me the opportunity to help other people up. It allows me to, host workshops in my area to help other people who are just starting. It allows me to be that aspiration for people who are at school and don't realize that being an artist is the career that they can have. It allows me to bring on other people for jobs and help them and to sort of show them the way, to give them an experience that they can have that isn't going to be an impact to them if they decide that it's not for them. That's okay. It allows me to help those people. And if I'm not in this position, if I don't continue my own craft, if I don't continue my skills, if I don't uphold the standards that I uphold, I don't get to do that anymore because I'm not in that position, right? It's not about the ego anymore. It's about wanting to help other people. And so who are you to stop, or who are you to not give out this information when you're in this position to be able to help other people? Who are you to feel sad about your own work when there's other people out there who haven't got any exposure, who don't even know that this is a career that they could do? How privileged are you? And so how are you going to use that? Use that to just continue to feel like you want to hold yourself up to this really high regard, or use that as a fuel to say, well, I want to be there because it allows me to do all these other things and help these other people. I really want you to reframe some of these things and think about some of the things that are driving you. If they're in this sort of grouping that I went through, or there's some other things that we talked about before, how can you reframe them into new fuel that will continue you driving into the future? I do want to close out with some questions for you to ask yourself. I want you to have a think about some of these things and reflect every now and again. I think it's so important to reflect. That's how I got here. After reflecting on some of the things that I thought, I was like, well, maybe this isn't helpful. Maybe this isn't the right way to be going about things. Maybe there is something more underlying here. Maybe the sort of foundations weren't as strong as I first thought. Have a think back to, are you more motivated by something that you aspire to get out of bed every single day and go do? Or are you just trying to run away from something that you're scared of? That's okay, but I think we need to sit down and think about those types of things. What type of fuel is driving you? Is there someone else that you're trying to prove wrong? And if so, how can you redirect that into trying to prove yourself right? Trying to find that within yourself to say, well, I'm on the right path already. I don't need to be proving these people wrong. Is there a project that you're working on right now that doesn't necessarily align with your purpose? Doesn't align with what you want to achieve longer term, and it's just to try to prove to someone else that you could do this project? It's okay. If you're already in that project, it's fine. Just understanding it, I think, is the most important thing. Because it allows you to think about, well, when that next project comes in, is it something that I really want to do? Is the price point okay for me? Is it the type of job that I'm going to be committing to for the next 2 years just to prove to other people that this is something I could do? But it's not really something that you want to do, and you'll get 2 years down the track and you've spent the last 2 years on a project just to prove to someone else who at the end of that 2 years, they don't really care either. Important to think about, right? If you're in it right now, it's fine. But don't make the same mistake twice. And think about what other sort of positive fuel you could bring into your life, into your business, into your creativity that can help project you in a different direction. What type of fuel to be a more creative person, a more experimental person? What's the fuel that you've got to draw on to get there? To try new things, to be able to take new risks? Is it the ego needs to come back down for you to say, hang on, I need to go get an extra job on the side that then allows me to not have to take these jobs? But I can take the jobs that really do mean something to me, and I can be a bit more creative with some of these other jobs. Or I need to change direction completely into something that I do have more purpose in. And so in order to do that, I've got to step down here. So I need to step something else up over here. And then have a think about what's one small action you can take this month to really reconnect with your purpose. If it is wanting to be more experimental, what's a project you can try that is experimental that won't necessarily earn you a huge income, won't be the best project for the year, but it's a bit more experimental? Or what's one way you can give back to other people? How can you inspire some other people? Or what's one way you can do a photography job for someone else, that's going to help them in some way, even more than yourself? Just try those things and see how much you enjoy them, right? Because so often, again, we forget to stop and we're working to outrun something that isn't even there anymore because we've got our blinders on. Have a think about what it would look like to do a different type of project that you would be more inspired by. And when you get to the end of it, think about, well, did I enjoy that? And when all those other things start to come up to the surface of thinking about, well, why was I doing this before? End of the year, have a think about it as we head into 2026. I just want to say that having that sort of negative fuel when you're starting is okay. It's fine. We need something to get us off the starting block. Okay. Far too many people are stuck on the start line and they haven't moved. And we can't see all the opportunities we could get when we're stuck back down there on the ground. We need to get up. We need to get off the starting block. We need to get up into the sky to be able to see the other opportunities. And so having that motivation when you're starting is important. But then how can you change that into something else? How can we see that that's what we use and that's okay? But we need to transition it into something else in order to continue us on that trajectory. So don't go away from this thinking that's bad. Don't go away from this taking anything that I said to heart because you feel like you're in a bad place right now and everything you've done hasn't all been for anything. It has been. You've just now got to figure out a different way to continue on because you may not have hit that wall yet. But I'm sure if you've spoken to anyone else, they have hit that wall before and have realized that maybe there was something underlying that wasn't as secure as they once first thought. Okay. And so how can you reassess to get those things in place before you ever hit that wall? If you haven't hit the wall yet, it's great. It's a good opportunity to think about, I don't want to have to be slowed down by having to hit that wall in order to make the change. I'm going to make the change ahead of time. And I'm going to be really proactive about it. You can start by running from fear, but the businesses that last are the ones that are running towards something that gives them purpose. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is going to be episode number 1 of season 4 of my creative journey, my podcast. It's coming back, starting now, obviously, but going on every week, coming out new episodes every Monday, starting forward. And I thought that the first episode would be best off done by myself. I was interviewed recently on an episode of the Kickin with Creatives podcast with Kenny, and he talked about my podcast and he talked about the first season of the podcast. He brought it up. He'd obviously done his homework about the first season that I did all by myself. And he talked about how hard that must have been to do a podcast by yourself. And I was thinking about it. I was like, I actually quite enjoyed that process of creating and getting ideas out of their head and sharing them with other people. And whilst there weren't a lot of people around who've tuned into any of those episodes because they were years ago before I had any sort of audience that I do now, I think that those episodes were so fundamental in where I am today. And I thought, why not just bring them back? Because I want to take this podcast in a direction that is more reflective, that is going to open up and talk about the things that creatives actually really care about and the struggles that we go through. And so if I'm expecting that of other people, I want to do it myself. So what better way to do it than just to sit here and talk, stream of consciousness type stuff, where I'm just talking to you about something that I really care about. And so I'll link that episode down below, that interview that I did with Kenny. I think it was a great chat, and I'll link it down there if you haven't seen it before. His podcast, it's a really good one as well. In-person podcast, unlike this podcast, which I get to interview people from all over the world. He's got an in-person podcast, but he's got a beautiful studio there as well. So it's a beautifully well-produced episode if you haven't checked that one out already. But we're going to be starting off season 4, as I said. Interviews coming up in the next couple of weeks as well, and continuing on into season 4. New episodes every Monday, and I'll have them linked wherever if you're tuning into this episode after the new ones are out. But if not, stick around because it's going to be a really exciting season with a new format of the podcast that I'm really excited about.